Welcome to Roo Code Office Hours, the Roo Cast. My name is Hannes Rudolph, the community manager here at Roo Code, and I'm joined today by Roo Code lead developer Matt. Welcome. And we have Danny, the CEO of Roo Code, and our special guest Brian Fioca from OpenAI. Welcome, everybody.
Hello.
Sorry, dead silent. We're supposed to do that. I think that the first thing I heard about you from Matt was that you were trying to get evals running with Roo Code.
Right. That feels like years ago now. Yeah. So I'll just talk about that for a second. So yeah, I've been at OpenAI since April. And just like a quick background about me, I am an architect on the applied startups team, focused on coding startups right now,
Okay.
and a few other ones. So what that means is I work with startups. I help them make the most of our models through the APIs and through products that we have in the platform. And if they have trouble getting things to work, I can feed that back to research so they can hill climb on customer cases that don't work, or to product to let them know that really we need these kinds of features for them. So I'm kind of like a little bit of a intermediary between groups, which is pretty awesome. And yeah, so so before this, I was at a startup studio called Pioneer Square Labs, where I made, I think, like 5 AI startups from scratch and got them funded. And I did the whole startup studio thing for a while, 0 to 1 inside of venture capitalist firms. And that was pretty fun. I think I started like 10 or 12 companies that way. And before that, I was in early YC in 2008 with a company called Rescue Time, which is still around. And through that, I got to do, startup school mentoring and some other things. So I've been sort of like in startups since the 90s, literally. So that's kind of my background. And yeah, when we met, I was just working on sort of like getting a handle on how our models were working inside of coding tools. So
well, it was a bit of a surprise. Like, it's pretty awesome to see that someone from OpenAI was playing around with Roo Code.
Yeah.
And like that blows my mind.
Yeah. So what happened was, like, when I started, I was, I had been using like lots of different models to vibe code a lot at my previous job, and starting here, I was getting a flavor for how to use 4.1 and 0.3 especially inside of our tools, and sort of like writing out documentation and trying to figure out like evals on like how to sort of like measure how we're performing inside of different tools. and Roo Code had a whole eval suite, which is pretty great, and like it was pretty easy to sort of like set up, and it's open source, so can sort of like modify things and check it out. So super interesting for us to sort of like collect data on, like I said, like how our models are performing inside of different shaped harnesses.
Yeah. Well, there's so many questions that I want to ask you. I'm gonna instead of filling this space with just me blabbing, I'm gonna throw you over to Matt, and he has some engineering level questions for you, not just community manager.
Wouldn't set the bar that high, but yeah, it's fun to echo what Hannah said, though. It's awesome to see you like really digging into our code. At some point, I'd love to get the honest feedback on what you think and what we could do better. But just to understand a little bit more, like what day to day, like which models, and like what's your I guess workflow, like your daily driver, like how do you use AI day to day in your
Yeah.
thing?
Oh, geez. So since I work with, all kinds of like coding startups, I try to use as many different coding tools as I can. So I mean, right now I have VS Code open with Roo Code and Klein and Codex. I have a cursor window open. I have Warp open. I have Windsurf. I have, all of the ones that you've heard of, and maybe more. And sort of like what that lets me do is sort of like figure out how, like, especially right now, GPT-5 and 5 Codex like work in these situations, and like where they're not, like stacking up to where I want them to be. But also, like, that lets me I tend to kind of like try to multitask. So as I'm collecting information about how our models are working inside of tools, I'm like firing off like 7 or 8 like different project like agents, like building example repos or working on cookbooks or like working on running evals for different startups that I'm working with. And yeah, like it's interesting, like different ones have a different feel. And so it's kind of nice to get to use them all.
So why is Roo Code your favorite one then? Not
Well, I spent a lot of time in Roo Code because well, for one of the big things that this is sort of a tangent, but like we were trying to evaluate how GPT-5 was working in different like coding situations. So, we have like SWE-bench and all these other sort of like evals that like measure like essentially intelligence and like can they solve these like coding problems. But it's the year of agents, and we wanted to see how our models would perform in actual software engineering tasks, right? And like those aren't really captured very well in a lot of these benchmarks. So one of the things I was doing was I was taking like open source repos that I could understand really well and kind of like taking them apart and then giving the models a task inside that repo that I could then kind of like evaluate the rollout of. I mean, when I say I mean like my team of people. There's a bunch of us doing this. So we could evaluate the rollout and like measure performance on like a task. Like the one that I used for Roo Code the whole time was updating from using the older style chat completions API and XML tool calls to the new style responses API and native function calls. It turns out that takes a model a really long time to do. I mean, it takes a person a really long time to do. And there's a lot of different ways it can get hung up along the way. And so I was looking for things like, does it just like quit and be like, I can't do that, it's impossible? Or does it get kind of like halfway through and miss something, or those sorts of things. So I got really kind of like into the code base while I was working on that.
So the eval is basically like, how do you update to use the responses API? Not really eval. That was the task, right?
Yeah, that was a task because it seemed pretty like hard. Like take this code base at the time that wasn't using responses and just like it was also another project that we were working on. I was like helping people migrate to responses and showing them the reason why it's a good idea to migrate to responses and running evals against like the before and after and so it was like kind of like I said, like I'd like to do more than one thing at a time. And so it was actually a really convenient code base to work in.
This sounds extremely similar to what we do day to day of trying to improve these coding harnesses. That's cool. I didn't realize your work was so close to this part of it. Have you been, so when you do it, are you trying to, I guess, how much like human in the loop are you aiming for there? Are you trying to like guide it every step of the way, or are you hoping that you can get it to work for like 10, 20, 30 minutes at once and actually make
the
significant progress?
Yeah, so this was like part of just sort of like this list of like basically kind of like personal vibe test evals that I was using for GPT-5. And like at first the goal was to sort of like watch it manually and like see if it gets stuck and figure out where it gets stuck and see if it can like prompt it out of there, or maybe there's a problem with the model or it's just being too lazy and that needs to be sort of like corrected on the model side. So the eval process that I used for that was and we use this all the time, is you give it a task, you sort of like watch it perform the task, you come up with how you want to grade it. In this case for GPT-5 we were grading on it was proactivity, like whether it was like going to just like go ahead and do all of it, context manage it, like could it keep all of the context that it needed in memory without getting lost, communication, like is it like telling you its plan and like keeping you abreast of what's going on like as it goes, and then testing, like is it checking its work, is it making sure that it all goes. And so for this particular eval set that we did for 5, we like had that rubric and then we would sort of like hand grade it and say, okay, like this looks like a 3 out of 5 on this. And then we would use LLM as a judge to sort of like, and then tune the rubric until the LLM was as good at us at like rating these things. So that was the process that we used for it. And I think that's that's my recommended way of like having people do evals for these sorts of like agentic tasks is figure out what you want it to do, figure out what you don't want it to do, and then manually like match your score, your human grading, human in the loop scoring to a rubric that a model can replicate reliably. That's the secret.
That's super interesting. Like for us, I guess I have a couple questions branching off of that. I know Danny had some questions for you about evals later. He's been the biggest kind of proponent of an eval-oriented structure for the way we work.
Yeah.
But first, I wanted to get a little bit into, and Hannes is going to have some more thoughts on this too. Like, you've been evaluating GPT-5 and GPT-5 Codex. Is that what you're saying? Like with your main focus as you're going through this in the different harnesses?
Yeah, that's what I'm focused on right now. Yes.
Yeah, I guess I'm selfishly kind of curious, like what you found, because for us, like we've seen, I guess a lot. And Hannes, keep me honest here. We've seen a lot of success with GPT-5 within Roo.
Mhm.
I think Codex has been a little bit harder for us to get working, even though it works well in other harnesses. And I'm just kind of curious for your thoughts on that. Like, is that an isolated thing for us, or other people experiencing that as well? Like, should we be investing more in getting Codex to work well, just given how well it seems to work within its own harness, for instance?
Yeah, that's a super good question, and it's a super interesting like cause of confusion right now. So like the general idea is yes. So I like 5 working inside of Roo Code. There are some things about it that like I might actually kind of like submit as patches to sort of like make it even better. But the way the models tend to work inside of different harnesses is like, so there's a difference between 5 and 5 Codex. 5 is sort of like our general purpose model that does more than just coding. It can sort of like do other sort of agentic tasks. It can chat with you. It can do all kinds of things, and it has different reasoning levels that it is managing to sort of do that. And so as part of that, it needs to have a little bit of a diverse training set and capabilities. And like one of the things we did with 5 was try to make it more generalizable across different harnesses and different tools. So for example, using to-do tools and using semantic search and different types of like apply patch, although that's still a bit tricky, and other tools that you find in different harnesses. And what we're doing with that is like I said, we're working with different harness makers, and like Roo Code is one of them, to like look at what are the different tools that are available for models to use inside of a harness, and like adding that to our eval set, and research kind of grinds away on that. The difference with 5 and Codex is very tightly optimized to the Codex harness and the Codex basically kind of like product cycle. So it is sort of like our opinionated take on like how to build a model and harness together. And it's not going to do things like communicate as much with you along the way. It's got a different way of updating the status, usually through to-dos, and that's the way the harness is built. There's a little bit of like reasoning summaries that it gives you, but it's not as chatty, and it's just much more focused on its apply patch tool and its search tool, and it just kind of is hyper trained on that. And I could go off on like a huge tangent about like what it means to sort of like train on different tools, but that means that it's harder to get it to work in a harness that it's not trained for. So when people like implement Codex in their harness, it works better for them to just like cut out almost all of their tools and just like have it use like our apply patch, which is open sourced, and basically like rip grep to search around code. And that makes it like work more like the way it does in its harness. But that's the real difference between those two models. Is like 5 is general purpose and more adaptable, and 5 Codex is just like this is like our stance on how this works inside of our tools. But I work with lots of coding startups, and we like to share the models that we make for our harness with them, so they can use in the APIs and like share back our learnings for what it's like to build these harnesses and have the models work in them, so that you as like a startup get to benefit from our knowledge too.
I use GPT-5 a lot. It's my go-to model, and the biggest hurdle that I've noticed people have about it is its speed, and that often leaves me scratching my head because it's not as snappy as some models, but the quality, like it follows instructions. I had been working on workflows uh, where we basically, instead of writing a script to do things, we just give very clear instructions, and it just calls everything. And before uh, GPT-5, you get 95%, and that was pretty good. But with GPT-5, like it's 100%. It follows the instructions. Like how? Nobody else's models follow instructions like GPT-5.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear. I have a sweet spot in my heart for GPT-5 because I was sort of like adjacent to the room where it was learning. So like getting to see it kind of like grow up in a way was just like it's really nice, and like getting to sort of like understand it, how it works is really cool. So yeah, like instruction following, like all of these things, like I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record, I think, but you know, one of my coworkers and mentors, I think, did a talk called "Evals are all you need." And so, you know, the way that we kind of like, you know, build products and models and those sorts of things, and this is the way that like I think that like this sort of new world of software development is in this like AI era, is you figure out what you want your product to do. If it's like AI powered, which is now a non-deterministic sort of like way of engineering, and you set up evals for the things that you don't want it to do, and you track those things, and you set up the evals for the ones that you do want to do, and then you can basically kind of like do all of the machinery behind the scenes to just like run it and tune it and get it to work the way that you want to. And so that's essentially it. Like, I don't know that there's any secret sauce there that I can kind of like share or give away. I'm not in the research team. But you know, I think the general concept is really kind of like what I tell all startup founders is like, figure out what's important that you want to do in this version of your product. Like, focus on that. Make sure you have it nailed down in a reproducible way. Like I said, like start with like human graded like evals, and then you know, grind away on getting it to the point where it's working the way that you want, like measure its progress, and then there you go. But yeah, like you were talking about speed. That was an interesting one because that's one that we did not capture in our evals for 5. We were looking at, like I was saying, like getting it to be more collaborative, to have it. We actually didn't even do anything with correctness as much. I mean, maybe there's some stuff behind the scenes that I wasn't working on, but we were much more concerned about giving it the right habit, and having that habit sort of like have a emergent property of coming up with the correct code. So by giving it the habit of testing, making sure that it learned to test, it more often than not came up with correct code that was like, you know, probably hard for us to sort of measure with an eval. And so that's just one of the things.
Good, Danny. Sorry.
Yeah, I couldn't resist on the subject of evals, and hopefully my mic isn't giving any more feedback. We were having a little bit of problem with that earlier. So when GPT-5 Mini scored 99% on our evals, like that was kind of a big moment for us. That it made us kind of look at all of the main models that folks are using, and basically like every version of like GPT-5 and the Sonnet and Opus suite are also like, they're all just too good for our evals. And so we lose a little bit of the texture of like what these things are good at, and we're sort of back to evaluating these things on vibes on some level, like, which is the thing I wanted to get away from when we introduced eval.
Oh, we lost him.
That's okay. I can talk about that a little bit. I don't know that he'll hear me, but the running on vibes for this phase is not unusual. Like it is a lot more difficult to make evals for this kind of behavior than it is for like code correctness, or whether it's like solving the problem that you wanted to solve with like correct code, or like, you know, leak code examples or whatever. because what you're really doing is you're measuring sort of like work style habits, right? So like one of the things that like I think about is, you know, we're like sort of like saturating all these evals that we have on intelligence, right? Like models are getting smarter with like raw intelligence, but now they have to kind of do jobs as an agent. And in order to do different jobs, you have to kind of like measure them like you would somebody like at a job. Like you give them a job description, which is sort of like a guideline or a policy or a prompt. And then like over time, you sort of like watch their work and you give them feedback and like you figure out where they're not performing. And essentially like a performance review is a kind of eval for a person. And so if you design your sort of like coding evals like you would sort of like a startup engineer or like a software engineer performance review, then you can measure their ability in the same ways as you can measure somebody who's like coding. And like I think that's really kind of like the way to go. And you can do that in like an automated way with you know, basically kind of like letting the agent run and then like running, I guess, like greps over the code that it does to make sure that it gets to something like the right answer that you're looking for. You can like checkpoint along the way and look for things, but the best approach for that I've seen. Sorry, Danny, I answered most of your question while you're.
I was catching it backstage. My browser crashed.
Cool.
As these must have been vibe coded.
That's okay. Mine almost updated.
Not Atlas, right? It wasn't Atlas, right? Atlas
No, switching back to Atlas forever. Sorry.
Yeah, I love Atlas. But yeah, so I mean, I think to answer your question, we're in a phase now where we're all making new kinds of evals for these things, and it takes taste, right? Like you as a particular kind of software developer engineer who are making a tool that like you work with, have a certain amount of taste for like what you want it to do and how you want it to perform, and you know, coming up with, like I said, like a repeatable process that you can kind of like look at its work and judge it and then somehow implement that in an automated way is like the next phase of evals. And a lot of that's LLM as a judge. And like, you know, not to plug, but we have a whole suite of platform tools around like evals and those sorts of things for agentic workflows. So it's the frontier.
Yeah, I really like that. I think one place that we've differentiated ourselves is I think we were really early in like the custom modes and thinking of you have a bunch of different kind of personas that you switch into. And I remember one of the kind of early mind-blowing things for me about this was when we were showing it to our finance person, and she was like, "Oh, I wonder like how to set up a finance one of these." And you know, I was going to try to tell her how to write a prompt and stuff, and she actually just took a job description and dropped the URL into Roo and asked Roo like make this persona, and it did a great job of actually almost like hiring somebody. So it's really interesting to hear you talk about evals in the same sense, almost through like a management or HR like lens of like
Yeah,
think of the role, how do you evaluate the role?
I
And it's
really
not
do think of it that way. It's like you're giving it a job description. That's your prompt. And then it's like you're giving it tools to use like you would somebody you hired. Like, you know, you have a coding harness that are its tools, or maybe you have a plugin to like Google Docs or Word or Slack or all these things. And so like now you actually have this intelligent agent like essentially sitting at a computer doing a job, and you can kind of like grade it on its job. And I think that's like how we build these things now.
when are they going to start doing their upward reviews of us as prompters and managers? And then
That's interesting. I want feedback on like, I want to know what it thinks about my code. It's not as good.
What,
I
what I find,
presume my messages giving feedback are logged for later day when the AI has more power. So I'm pretty careful.
That's great.
one thing that I really utilize a lot is the thinking summaries. When working with Roo, seeing how the thinking summaries sort of go over, you know, their thoughts per se on which tool to use, when to use it. You know, it says like, oh, I'm only allowed to use one tool call at a time. So, you know, I'm not going to use the to-do list because that will slow things down or something like this. These sort of thought blurbs help me troubleshoot thing or the way we use our tools. Like it's quite useful.
Exactly. Yeah, that is so powerful. So one thing I'll say about speed again, real fast, is like I said, we didn't eval 5 on speed. 5 Codex has a capability now where it can kind of like better manage its thinking budget. So if you ask it like a really quick yes or no question where it doesn't need to use a tool, it'll respond pretty quickly in that way. And that's, you know, something that we're teaching models to do now. And like their thinking budget is actually like pretty interesting because like one of the evals that we're using for that is like how much time is it spending thinking versus answering certain types of questions. So you can go like pretty deep on resolution for these things. And then, so, okay, I'm going to go off a little bit of a tangent about reasoning because you were saying one of the things we did with 5 was we gave it the ability to print out preambles before tool calls. So, you know, the way the responses API works is since O3, models can call tools inside their chain of thought, which is a pretty cool behavior. While they're thinking, they're like going off and searching the code base or doing other sorts of actions. And like with O3, it just would go off and kind of like do all this thinking and like calling tools and then kind of like, and then eventually like spit out some kind of answer, which was kind of like hard to follow if you were coding with it. So we trained 5 to print out, like you can prompt it so that while it's like calling tools while it's thinking, it can give you an update about what it's doing. And we call them preambles. But I noticed that in its chain of thought, it was calling them status updates. It's like, oh, I need to give a status update before this tool call. And like once I saw that, looking at the chain of thought, I was able to kind of like figure out how to prompt it to steer its status updates, its preambles, in a way that like was better. Like, so instead of it being like before each one, you know, we could say this, you know, for status updates, like give one every few tool calls or like before logical groups of tool calls. And so looking at reasoning, like now suddenly gives you the ability to like see its internal thought process for its behaviors that it's been trained to do. And if you understand how it thinks about its behaviors, you can tell it to change them. And so that like it's like really like reading reasoning summaries is really powerful in terms of like how you prompt these things, because reasoning models prompt a lot differently than non-reasoning models. Non-reasoning models is about like setting up the latent space so that it kind of falls into the answer that you want it to do, because it's just dumping out text. With a reasoning model, it has time to like look at its instructions and be like, oh, okay, I'm going to do this. Oh, wait, now I have to check to make sure that I'm doing this in the right format. Is it right? No. And then change it. Okay, cool. Now I'm ready to answer. Right. So that's like the way that reasoning models, like they have an instruction, they go off and do it, and then they check to make sure that they're following their instructions correctly before they respond. So you can, especially if you can see how they're reasoning, you can really structure this amazing flow of instruction following there that way.
Yeah, as a manager, how many times I wanted to say like, "What were you thinking?" It's really cool with the with the agents. I did want to. I did
Oh
want
my
to
God,
ask about
before you
this.
go on,
Like,
I want to say
yeah.
that was the last thing that that we were doing. Like, so I was like trying to help tune all these different system prompts for different harnesses for coding. Like, you know, people were putting in their system prompts from other models into the tools and trying to put GPT-5 in there, and 5 was like acting weird. It would be like, you know, at first, you know, inside of Cursor and Windsurf, it would just like go off and search forever, like look through every single file and every single import, and it was like, why is this doing that? And so literally I just like asked it, hey, like, why did it take you so long to like start editing the file at the end of it? I was like, that's a good answer, but why, like, what took you so long to like get there? And it was like, well, the instructions said to like make sure I look at every single file that's included. And what that probably was, you know, somebody put that there for a different model who didn't quite have the habit of looking around as much. And we trained 5 with the habit of looking around like as much as it needed to. So if you told it to do it more, it was pretty literal. And it'd be like, okay, well, I guess I better go do this now. So back to your saying about asking, like literally asking it inside of the harness, like, hey, like, how do I instruct you? What about your instructions right now are making you do this thing that I don't like? Or how do I change them so that it does this other thing? And that's literally like how I prompt engineer now. It's just like stick them in the harness, have them work, and then have them critique their work with their own instructions, and then fix them.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I wanted to ask you about a discussion that's been happening over the last few days on I still call it Twitter,
Yeah.
about the mini max model, and just a lot of discussion. I don't know if you've been following it, about the chain of thought related to tool calls, and how preserving the chain of thought is really important, for best performance, and maybe a part of that there about how the OpenAI chat completions API, it's a little bit hard to do that built in, but that's what most people use.
Right.
As I'm curious, I don't understand this stuff as well as I should, but does the responses API solve that, or are there different approaches that we should be taking, for interleave thinking?
Yeah, amazing question. That's a really important one too. And so, we, and then when I say we, I mean like smart people before I started, came up with the chat completions API, and before that, the completions API. Completions was about auto completing a text file. Chat completions was about having turn-based conversations. Responses is about having a model that can go off and like think and collect information and then respond in this way that gives it a lot of horizontal space to kind of like use tools and do all kinds of other things before it comes back in a vertical answer. And you can do a lot of the things that responses do inside of a chat completion, but you kind of like have to like formulate them so that it's like keeping all of its sort of like think step by step process in the chat completion, which is sort of like overloading the function of it, where you have these like thinking blocks that like maybe you don't display to the user, or you do it in a different way, or all these other sort of things that are just sort of like bad affordances for like how like reasoning models work. And if you were to use a OpenAI reasoning model inside of chat completions, it does all of the reasoning sort of like out of band, and its reasoning tokens don't get outputted at all into the chat completion. So you're asking it a question, it thinks about it for a while, it answers, but then all it sees is the ask and the answer, and it doesn't remember what it thought about or what it did to get to the answer. And so if you ask it again, it might actually go off and do the same searches the second time. Like this is what we were seeing in coding harnesses that weren't using the responses API. Is like it would go search for a bunch of files and then answer, and then you would ask it the next step, and it would go search the same files. And it's like, well, that's annoying. Like, why is it like it should remember that? But since it's not stored in the completion because of the way the API works that way, it was losing that intelligence. So with the responses API, you can save the reasoning tokens, even in like zero data retention. You can store the encrypted ones, and then they're re-included in the next response so that it remembers how it got to each answer. And that by doing that, like we've seen like 4 to 5% boosts in like SweBench just by like having it like keep its intelligence along the way. And yeah, so like big believer in that. And like otherwise you have to find some other way of like capturing that between calls, and like it's not really worth the bother.
Yeah, when I was implementing the responses API in Roo Code, I made sure to use the stateful interaction so that we, instead of having to send back that encrypted object, we're just using the previous response ID or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And when I use GPT-5, which is almost exclusively what I use these days, I use it direct with our OpenAI native provider, allowing me to take advantage of that. Because I did read that blurb on your in your docs about the, the SWE score being bumped up a few percentage points because of that. So I've sort of been thinking about how to ensure we can get that consistency with the other providers that we use, and we obviously want to implement that as well. It's just with using completions and responses, it can be a bit challenging.
Yeah, it's a shame that those sort of diverged. It wasn't really sort of like a matter of like lock-in on our side. It's just a matter of like what is the best surface area for this kind of like API for the future, and like how do we maximize the model's capability during its thinking chain so that it can go off and do all this like work sort of like out of band, and then kind of like keep it around so that you can kind of follow along, and so it learns as it goes. So I mean there's a lot of things that we can do because of that. Like we can add in our own like tools that we provide. You can like it gives us room to put things like file search and web search and like other things like inside of the tool space of the API. And you can build in your own as well in the same way. And it just sort of like feels more organized than having an output of like different non-standard like XML blocks or like delimiters in the completions response that then you kind of have to manage yourself. So that's really the reason why it is that way. And hopefully that becomes easier to work with in the future. Like I like to use sometimes libraries like AI SDK or other ones that kind of like wrap that for you sometimes, so that you can, as a startup engineer, AI engineer, like it was sort of like on me to use the best model for the best part of the product, right? And so I had to manage different API endpoints and different sorts of things. And like we recognize that startup engineers, like it's their job to use the best model for the best part of their architecture. And like we hope that's OpenAI models, but sometimes it isn't. Like hopefully they'll tell us when it isn't, and we can climb on the areas that it's not. But it should be easy to use whatever model you need for whatever part of your application you're building. And it's not our purview to try to like make that hard.
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I do use other models for various tasks. Just when I get into my main code workflow right now, GPT-5 has risen to the top. It rotates because I had Opus. I was going hard with Opus. One day I did, I think, almost $950 in Opus API costs. So thank you for coming out with a model that's
have you tried the like GPT-5 Pro, like have it basically kind of like come up with a whole like architecture plan based on a requirement spec, and then like taking that and then feeding that into just like 5, even like you can put that in like 5 low, and if it follows the steps, then you can like front load your costs of model thinking power.
I have a pro integration that we're in the process of reviewing, so that way I can start testing it. Because my idea was here, like I have a task that's been running this whole conversation. I mean, I could have this pro running on this all day long.
Yeah, so, totally.
And I'm curious to see like what it will do. I want to give it. There are various issues that I haven't been able to fix with simple one-shots, or complex orchestrated one-shots, but one-shots nonetheless. And I sort of keep those in reserve. They're not huge issues for our users, but I'm really curious to set pro against some of these and see, like, does it just get it done?
Yeah. So one of the things I've been thinking a lot about lately is like, I think we talked about this a little bit in the past, but sort of like speed versus smarts, right? Intelligence, right? Like when do you want a model that's just sort of like keeping you in the flow? You're just kind of like cranking on like pair programming together. And when do you want one that is just like a galaxy brain that just like kind of goes off for 45 minutes and like comes back with like everything basically working? And I think I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and like how you're thinking about that in Roo Code, because it seems like we're in an era where like some tasks like you feel totally fine just like handing off for a while, but then what do? Like just go answer Slack messages for an hour?
Well, we're seeing this in action today. We were referencing earlier the debate that happens sometimes on the team between Team Sonnet, that's about speed, and Team GPT-5, which is about smarts. Well, we just introduced something that would be a purely asynchronous workflow in the form of our PR reviewer. Mm-hmm. And there is a place where GPT-5 shines, and we've tuned that prompt specifically to GPT-5. But that said, we've been dancing around this like a little bit. Is there a world where we don't have to trade off the speed and the intelligence? Like, is that a focus on making GPT-5 faster as the ultimate exclamation point?
I think so. Like as a user, like I want that, right? And like, I want a model that understands like when it should just like spend some time thinking about an answer, and like going off and doing it right, and when it like should sort of like involve me. And some of this is like having it intuitively understand the task and like what's involved in the task. Is this a task that's underspecified? So if so, then maybe I'll move more into what like some of our evals call lazy, and like ask you more follow-up questions, and like do a thing and be like, is this what you're looking for? And then kind of like go back and forth. Or if it knows that it's specified, to just kind of like go off and do it. So to answer your question, I think so. Codex is better at that sometimes than 5, which is maybe a temporary thing. We're trying to take the knowledge that we're getting from building Codex and like moving that back into the 5 model series as we go. And so, yeah, I think so. There's a lot of things about that I don't know, that I can't really answer. But I would want that as a user. So I would expect that to improve as we go. Yeah.
Do you find that the model is good at understanding how confident it should be in its answer? I think that's one, you're absolutely right. It's kind of a joke with a lot of these things, but it does seem like if it kind of knew when to think harder, that it would unlock a lot here.
I like 5 for being able to do that, and 5 Codex too. It's like I've seen people internally, and I've sort of had this happen too. Actually, yeah, I was making a dev day demo, and I couldn't get this one aspect of it to work. It was like I was spinning up the server, and it like wasn't connecting to the MCP server or whatever. And I was just like, I like asked it initially, like, okay, I'm not like, it's not connecting. Like I'm seeing this error. Like, what do I do? And it gave me this answer, and I was like, that's just wrong. So I like just like fiddled around for a while. I like asked it some other things, and it was just like, well, you can try this. And I did it for like 20 minutes. And then I eventually like was like, maybe I should try the first thing that it said. And it was totally right. Like that fixed it. So there's this part where I think a lot of us, especially like me coming into like when we were testing early alphas of 5, and I would like kick it off to literally like migrate our eval harness to use Docker. Like, okay, we have this email harness, like just go rewrite it entirely so that it kicks off parallel Docker tasks. And then like I think we kicked that off before lunch, and then came back, and it was like done like 45 minutes later. And me and my coworker are like, there's no way this is gonna work. And it like just like worked right away. Like once that happened, like I started to trust it more on its like capabilities and what it can actually do. And I think the trust part kind of like really matters in terms of like how much these things can sort of like do unsupervised, and how much you're willing to kind of like let them go and do things without too much feedback. And like I think we're just like on the cusp there, and that's just going to improve. But yeah, the models should know eventually when they know what they know and when they know what they don't know. And then how to sort of like get to the level of trust that they can go off and just like do something without interruption.
Yeah, I mean, one difference between what we see with the models and I think what we see with humans is like the idea of context rot. And the longer it gets into the task,
Yeah.
the worse it does overall.
Yeah.
I think honestly, like as you talk about things getting more autonomous, that feels like a real challenge or a real blocker. That we've tried to do things with context condensing and things like that. But do you have any thoughts on the future of that? Like I saw some, I don't know, maybe brilliant tweet about like time travel where the agent itself can call a checkpoint basically, and so basically go back in the history and send a message about like what it wished it would have known to make a better choice. And I just wonder, I mean, I thought that was really cool. I haven't tried it yet, but I'm curious like to hear your thoughts on just this overall idea of context rot and how we might make these things effective for longer and deeper in their task.
Yeah, I think that's frontier research, right? And like what I try to tell startups is if you're aware of where the frontier of research is right now, like build at that frontier, but also build with the understanding that like it's going to continue to advance in ways that you might not actually be able to predict. And like don't build yourself into a corner. So for like, one example of that is like completions. You can build into a local maximum of like optimizing this whole framework of tool calls that are like essentially like a hack on like overloading the API. and then kind of like miss out on some of the improvements that are coming in the future. So saying that, and without talking too much about like roadmap stuff or any of the things that like I don't know about, I've personally, before working at OpenAI, like worked on some projects with like long-term memory, right? And so context rot happens. I worked on a companion app for seniors, and the idea was like it would sort of like get to know your habits and like help you remember to take your medicine and that sort of stuff. And it was, you know, this unending conversation over text message, and you know that wasn't going to fit in a context window. So like really quickly kind of had to figure out like how do I keep its knowledge between days like seeming like it's like smart, it's learning, it's like it's not bumping me on like things that are wrong. And so I spent a long time like figuring out how to do long-term memory context engineering, right? And I think the same kind of like approach applies with coding models. I would sort of like lean towards building on something that already kind of like exists and not inventing the wheel here, because this is, like I said, probably a frontier area of research where improvements will come. But in the meantime, you know, as a coding agent, like looks around a code base, like figures out where the front end code lives, figure out what libraries talk to what backend subsystem, and those sorts of things, and having them save that out in an agents MD file, or building your own sort of like custom memory system for it to kind of use. I like to use retrospection for those, like have it like learn from a rollout instead of it calling a tool, because models aren't really trained on calling memory tools right now. And so they're not super reliable about what they remember. But you can have one run afterwards and say, hey, what should I remember about this type of task next time? And then use that in the context window in the next turn if it's necessary or helpful. Like that's sort of like how I think about memory in general. Like that works for any kind of agent system. And I think that solves a lot of the slowness problem too, right? A lot of the slowness problem of like a model while you're coding with it is it's going off and gathering context because it's the first time it's seeing this code base every single time. But if it can get a feel for it and like capture that understanding of where things are, what it's done in the past, what kinds of problems that it solved before that help it remember to do something differently next time, then it'll just get smarter and faster as it goes.
Yeah, I love the idea of retrospection. We've been wanting to do that for a while, and this might be the thing we need to actually do it. I was going to ask before we run out of time here, like, I mean, you've been in our code base, you've seen it. Like, what would your top like 2 or 3, I think, recommendations of things for us to focus on, like, given where everything's going? Like, what should we prioritize?
Yeah, I mean, I like to see, you know, better, like not better, like strong use of like parallel tool calling. That's not something that like 5 does out of the box really well. First of all, you have to have responses implemented correctly, and then you have to use the sort of like our version of function calling inside of that. And then you have to actually prompt 5 to call things in parallel, and that's in the prompting guide. But by doing that, like, and in certain like cases, you can actually prompt it different strategies for like how to call tools in parallel, how to context gather for certain questions. So, I mean, I might like it's the kind of thing where like I have a lot of things that like I have in this branch in the Roo code base that I could probably just like send you. But yeah, like that's kind of like
Please
where
do.
I would,
Yeah.
that's kind of
Please
where I
do.
would
Yeah.
optimize right now is like, you know, just sort of like making it like really responsive and fast and like optimizing it for its way of thinking and its way of you know, calling tools. The other thing that like I've seen like the closer you get to our apply patch format, because so the other thing that I'll say about like model training is like there's like a raw intelligence piece, and then there's sort of like a habit forming piece. So as it's learning to like solve problems and do different tasks, based on how it's trained, it sort of like almost gets a little bit burned in, like its favorite way of doing things or the way that it learns how to do things better. So with our models for coding right now, they have a particular way of doing apply patch, and they can make code edits with a different tool. It's just that if you think about it like a person, if you're sort of like giving somebody a whole bunch of stuff to do, and they're like trying really hard to do a really good job, and they have this like slightly different way of like having to give you the answer, like maybe a keyboard with like the layout differently, then they're gonna like have to think harder about that part of it, and they might screw something else up along the way, right? So there's like more attention, I think, that it has to give to the things that it's like not trained to do as well. And so by sticking closely to things like apply patch formats, which I know are different for every model, but we're trying to make that easier to do, then you're actually also kind of like boosting its other capabilities as well, because it doesn't have to like spend as much time like forcing itself to do it a different way than its like habit is.
Yeah. Can I ask you what?
Oh, there was another thing.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was wondering if like what you thought about Zed's sort of like ACP situation. I don't know if you've seen the Zed editor, but like basically they've almost decided entirely to like not write their own harness, and just like have like Codex and Cloud Code and I think another one just sort of like built in with like an agent wrapper, so that you can literally just kind of like have the harness that is built for that model like and optimized for it go off and like work inside of the coding tool.
Yeah, I haven't personally used it, so I don't want to comment too much on it. It does sound really great for, I guess, executing the tool calls well.
Mhm.
I think for us, we've been taking the approach that kind of like you alluded to. There's a lot of models out there, and some of them are good at different things.
Yep.
So being able to kind of jump between them in a cohesive format, or having them like play off of each other, has been really nice. We talk about having a team of agents.
Mhm.
Maybe there's a way to do that in Zed, which is awesome, and maybe we should look more into it.
No,
I like the idea.
I was just curious what your thought
yeah.
about that is, because like if one thing that I was thinking is there might be times, and I don't know if this will always be true, where it's like sometimes it's easier to kind of like defer to like the built-in harness to kind of like do something, but I don't really know. Like I haven't used it that much either. I feel like for me, so far right now, I like the sort of like interactivity piece. So that wasn't a plug for Zed. That was just sort of like me thinking about your...
We like to talk about different tools and how to use them. I mean, we are not under the illusion that people don't continually try out all sorts of tools. So
yeah.
Can I ask you, what can we do as Roo Code and our community to help you guys?
Yeah. Keep doing what you're doing. Like, let us know what is like difficult, what's not working, like what you see working in other places, that like you're having trouble getting to work using our models or using our APIs, because literally like if we know that and we know that it's like a problem and we can reproduce it on our side, we can fix it. And like so much of what I do working with startups is like just almost like trying to call out as much information as I can. Is like we just like literally can't see everything. Like you guys have the taste for this, and you can see things more clearly that we can about like how our models are performing in different cases, and like letting us know like what could be better, or even like oh, we really want it to be able to do this, and we've built this into our harness and it's struggling in this way, and even better, and we've made this eval showing that like it's only like succeeding like 39% of the time or something. Then like literally I can take that back and be like, cool, let's go fix this. And I think that's like the most helpful thing you can possibly do. So please keep doing that.
Yeah.
Everyone report your bugs to Hannes. He'll
will
orchestrate.
Fast track them.
Yeah.
So we usually end with a lightning round, although I gotta confess, I didn't prepare a real hey, how about I go first and I'll come up with one question, and then Hannes and Danny each think of one question that you want to ask Brian, put him on the spot. Here's mine. What do you think we're gonna be talking about next year in AI? Like what do you think the main story is gonna be?
Oh my gosh, how do I answer this question without getting in trouble? I think like what we're seeing is like on like we were talking about before in terms of like the trajectory of like how long tasks AI can do is like that is just like going up and to the right. And I think we're at a point now where like we've seen like models go off for like hours at a time to like solve problems, and like next year we're going to be looking at maybe like models that coordinate with each other, like orchestrate like agents with like sub agents that like orchestrate each other and go off and do like whole suites of tasks and like keep track of their progress. And um, I think that's kind of like more about work, like layers of like management hierarchy inside of not just an employee, but like employees and teams, and they're all kind of coordinating. In my preference, they would be using human tools like Slack or Linear or something like that, so that people could follow along. But yeah, I think that's like where we're going.
Mine is by the end of the next year, editor or no editor.
I this is a spicy take because I'm talking to you, but I would like it like as somebody who's done like coding since I was 7, like if tomorrow you told me that like I didn't have to write a single line of code again because like I could just like hire out an agent that just like does a better job of it than me, I would sign up for that. Like I want products, like I want features, I want like outcomes. I don't care at all like what it looks like under like the hood, right? Like who cares what the bytecode looks like under your Java code? Who cares what the machine language is? Like do I ever want to have to like look at that again? No. Would I do it as a hobby? Yeah. But I think we end up with like editors for people who like developing their own film and photography, but other than that, like I think they're just not useful anymore.
Okay, my question here is probably a bit of a doozy. Roo
It's
Code
supposed to
works
be a
off
lightning round.
Roo Code works off of API calls,
Yes.
API costs usually, and in the recent months, there's this trend for Anthropic and you guys and other people to have subscription-based products that ultimately, lead users to use your guys' coding tool, which I don't think that you guys ever said, hey, our goal is to replace VS Code. How can Roo Code compete with, subscriptions?
That's a good question that I have never thought about up until this very moment. I wish I had a good answer for this.
I mean, I personally don't think
Maybe
they're
the
going to last
maybe
forever. I think
yeah, I
it's
was
a
going to say
short-term
maybe the
thing.
lightning round. Yeah, maybe the lightning round version of this is subscriptions
think-
or not subscriptions the business model of the future.
I think ultimately subscription,
go.
like the way the costs are for AI right now are like a factor of like how many chips and power is available, right? Like there's scarcity in those resources, and like subscriptions are a way of sort of like bundling that scarcity in a way that's like scalable for a business to do. And so that's just, I think it's like a side effect of like where we are in like the cycle of this technology right now. Ultimately, like, the cost of tokens is going to go down to like very, very small. And like, hopefully it like will stop mattering as much, like how much you're spending on an API. Like, you'll be able to run your own like local model that'll perform as well as, like 5 mini or even like 5 one day. And like then you won't even have to worry about like API costs at all. So I think like it's just a byproduct of our time right now, and eventually
it's a trend, I guess, because we've seen other tools like ours where they have subscriptions and then they drop them, and now it's in for the model providers to have subscriptions, and a year from now, who knows?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roo Code community. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you again next week. See you later, everybody.
Thank you.